And I just wanted to thank everybody involved for putting on an awesome conference, and looking forward to it. So today we're going to be checking out one of the pieces of content I made called the Bug Hunters Methodology. This is the Recon edition, and this is version 4.01. We have about 45 minutes to get through what is usually like a 2-hour talk or maybe hour and 30 talks. So if I talk fast, everything is linked in these slides, and you can Google all these tools, or you can just grab the hyperlinks off of the application or off of the text document when it's released after the show. So anyways, thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate it, and we'll get right into it. So the Bug Hunters methodology, what is it, right? So the Bug Hunters methodology is this talk I've been doing for several years now. Actually, I can trace it all the way back to BaruCon when I was still pen testing at HP before I was the director of pen testing there. And it was just like my notes on what tools were working for me in the pen test world, and then it extended into Bug Bounty when I moved into Bug Bounty and all that. And so this talk has been brewing and has been iterated on for many years now. And so the version you're seeing right now is version 4.001. And basically, I've had to split it into two sections. And today we're going over the Recon section, which is recon analysis inside of bug bounty hunting. And the other part of it is application analysis, what you actually do on a site. And that's a talk I'm going to release in the future. So today we're going to be talking all about recon when it pertains to bug bounties. So this is a quick about me. I'll be really quick. I'm a father, husband, hacker, gamer, and sometimes streamer. You can see all my social links there, and I'm a gamer too. And these are my awesome kids who I take inspiration from every day, and I couldn't do anything that I do without the support of them and my lovely wife. So yeah. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about, right? So we're at kind of like a bug bounty centric conference, and what I want to talk about is that having a way to track your work inside of your workflow is super important, right? An automation framework can do some of this for you, but really tracking your work and knowing where you picked up and put down contextually inside of your projects is really important. So I use a mind mapping tool called Xmind to build trees of how I do my work, but you can also track your work in many other ways. A lot of pen testers can do it straight in like Vim, or they keep Excel spreadsheets or notepads, or I've heard of people using things like Microsoft OneNote or something like that. So really what you want to do before you dive headlong into one of these giant scope programs or even a small scope program is have some place where you're going to take notes about where you are, what sites you were working on, interesting stuff, etc. So this is how I do mine, and this is Xmind, right? And I've built out a tree here, and here you can see I have the project name in the middle. So this is Tesla. Tesla is a bug bounty program with a wide scope, which is usually what I love to do, right? And then you can see on the left-hand side, I've broken this off into recon and then roots, right? And so the recon node has Tesla's ASNs, it's got its acquisitions, it's started to be a place where I can just dump random nodes or tool output. And then on the right-hand side, I have roots, right? And roots or seed domains, whatever you want to call them, these, something.com or something, .org or .net or something like, these are your roots, and they're what you're going to perform all your other analysis on, like your subdomain enumeration. So you have a list of your roots on the right, and then under each root, you have every subdomain for that root. And then under each subdomain, you're going to build up even more information. So this is at the beginning what it looks like. And then on the left-hand side of this page here is when you expand that roots column, you can see I have Tesla, and under Tesla.com, now I have all the subdomains of Tesla.com, which are direct output of something like HTTP probe. So all of these links are live. They are subdomains of Tesla.com, and I dump them right there under that node. And then if you drill down into one like www.tesla.com, you can expand that, and that's where I get into keeping my methodology notes, right? Notes about questions to ask, how does the framework handle special characters? How does it reference a user? Are there user roles? What are some of the dynamic parameters? Does it have API calls? Which parameters are referencing URLs or paths? Is there uploads in the sense of like multi-part upload forms? Are there business logic flows? These are all the kinds of like general questions you're going to start to ask yourself when you do a single site analysis, right? And so I keep these notes under the www.tesla.com node because I want to check these off as I go along during my testing of www.tesla.com and figure out, if I've remembered to do these things. And now what will happen is you'll see it's in orange right now. And orange means that I'm currently working on this node. Uncolored means it hasn't been touched at all, right? I just know about it. And green means I've completed assessment. And then when you drill down into the node on the right, I put check marks because this mind mapping tool allows me to put check marks by things. So, as I check for file uploads, okay, no, there's no file uploads. Cool, I'll check that off, and if I find one, I will, dump that link, inside of the file upload section, etc. So this is how I keep my notes. You can see I've marked some interesting endpoints like Tesla account / configurator API, etc. under interesting endpoints, etc. Notes on the technology. So this is how I keep my notes. It's really useful for me to pick up and put down a project and have this in front of me. But it's really important to just use any general note-taking or project tracking software to do this type of analysis. Not just to keep track of the URLs that are live and the port scan data and all that stuff, but also to contextually keep track of where you are and what you've done. Okay, so today we're talking about recon, and in specific, like this idea of wide recon, right? What we're going to talk about today is, a couple of programs that, I've had some experience with, or that I use in demos a lot because they've got wide scopes, right? And so we're going to do a little bit of an explanation of, finding your in-scope domains right off the bat. What are your seed domains? What is this company's acquisition? How do you enumerate an ASN? How do you do reverse Whois enumeration and subdomain enumeration and port analysis? And then we're going to talk about some other things that fit along with this wide recon idea. But yeah, that's kind of what we're going to get into today, is the idea of enumerating as many hosts as we can to give us the best chance of possible success in hacking this organization. So the first thing we're going to do is find these seed or root domains in a wide scope bounty, right? And these are sometimes given to you already, right? So here's the scope page for Tesla on bugcrowd.com. It's one of their widest scope bug bounties, right? And you can see here this asterisk next to the subdomain, and that just means you can test anything, any subdomain you find that is tesla.com or tesla.cn or Tesla Motors or anything like that, right? And so you can also test almost anything that you can, find out that's Tesla's. That basically, you have verified somehow to be owned by Tesla, which is awesome. This is a great scope to have for a program. Similar scope programs on HackerOne are Verizon Media, right? Everybody's favorite program, right? This is one of the widest scope. I think it is the widest scope bug bounty in the world, and they have so many assets and so many seed domains that I couldn't even fit it on one page when I made the slides. And they also have like some catch-all verbiage in their brief too when you're on HackerOne, that if you find a vulnerability that affects an asset belonging to Verizon Media, but it's not in the scope, please report it to them anyway. So it's kind of like a wide open playing field, right? There's so many acquisitions that Verizon Media has done over the years, and so many brands that they have, and they're doing these things all the time, acquiring companies and creating new brands, that this is like the never-ending scope. And a lot of hackers spend their whole career hacking on Verizon Media. So you'll find seed domains in the brief page for the site you're looking for. So the next thing that we do after we find the seed domains and we kind of add them to our notes is we want to find the acquisitions for a company. Another company I use a lot in my demos is Twitch, because I stream on Twitch, and they're a decent organization and stuff like that. So in order to do this, I use a tool called Crunchbase, and Crunchbase is this basically site that does business and intelligence. Basically, it'll tell you things like their people who work there, their investors, their funding rounds, the employees, all their links and stuff like that. So if you just, register a free account at Crunchbase, you can look up the organization, and here I put in Twitch, and you can go to their organization page, and you can see a whole bunch of information about them, and that they were acquired by Amazon themselves, but they also have a number of acquisitions which are Revlo, Clipmine, Curse, and GoodGame, right? And so depending on the scope of the bug bounty, these could be targets for us, well, right? Every one of those brands, those 4 new brands that we've found, have domains, right, that maybe have infrastructure still on them that's related to, what is Twitch now, or Maybe they forgot to disable something in one of those net blocks, or they haven't completely transferred over the infrastructure yet, or something like that, right? So it's a good place to start to look for related acquisitions or related companies. Now, you want to make sure that in the scope pages of the bounty that these companies are not explicitly out of scope. Because if they're explicitly out of scope, obviously you can't hack them. But in a wide scope bounty, if they're not, like the two we've mentioned, if they're not mentioned explicitly and out of scope, and you know that they're owned by your main company, then they're usually fair game. And if you're not sure they're fair game, just ask the program, submit like a dummy vuln, and say, hey, I might have found, some infrastructure on this domain. Is it cool to present you some findings I found there, and see what they say. So now we have our seed domains that are given to us in the brief, and we also have acquisitions for that company. So the next thing we want to do is kind of enumerate what their IP space is, right? And there are manual ways to do in this presentation, manual ways to do everything that I'm going to tell you about, right? So the first one that we're going to talk about here to enumerate ASNs is a site that I use all the time called bgp.ag.net. And bgp.ag.net basically lets you have a free-form search field to search for a company's name, and then it'll give you back anything that matches that name, and it'll give you the associated ASN numbers. And so these are collections of their IPs, their registered IP space that we know about on the internet. And here you can see that I put in Twitch, and I get back that I know that Twitch's organization name is Twitch Interactive Inc., and they have two ASNs, 46489 and 397153, and then the associated ranges that are associated to Twitch, which is great. Now we have some IP space that we know 100% is theirs, and if it's an open scope bounty, usually that stuff's in scope because that's your way of verifying that it is exactly there. Now, a quick note here is that this doesn't represent all their architecture, right? Many companies are, at least 50% or more in the cloud by now, right? So this only tracks their owned IP space. It's not tracking, assets that they've built in AWS, Azure, and GCP, right? So this is only a portion of their infrastructure. Your mileage may vary with, how much you use this data. So with everything in the presentation, I'd like to present the manual way to do it if you want to do it by hand and, be able to filter contextually with like your brain, or if you want to be able to automate and do stuff, I also offer usually a command line alternative. So there are two alternatives here for enumerating an ASN that I like, and actually a third one really recently that I've been using myself, right? So the first one is ASN Lookup by Yassine, and the link is down there, and this will just take a domain of yours with the TAC-O flag, and what it'll do is it'll run it through the maxmind.com data set for ASN information, which it downloads, and then it tries to find the output and gives you the ranges, right? Pretty simple. So now you have a set of ranges to work with, IPv4 ranges to check out. The other one is Metabigor by Jesse JJJ, and this one relies on a different data set. It uses asnlookup.com and also the bgp.ag.net site, and it'll also give you back the ranges. One thing here just to be mindful of is that using a baseline tool to do this, you're counting on the tool catching your keyword here, which is like Tesla, right? And Tesla has multiple entries when you do a free text search for a company, so you just want to make sure it's not catching any IP ranges that are out of scope, right? So there are many companies with the word Tesla in their name. It's not just Tesla Motors, right? So in these cases, you definitely want to basically somehow verify that the output of the tool is accurate. The third one I've been working with here, which is not on these slides, is actually one called ASN Recon. Now, ASN Recon does something a little bit different than this, where these go out and pull from these databases to pull out information. ASN Recon will go out and also it'll take a domain that you give it, and then it will find that ASN for you. But not only will it find the ASN for you, it'll also expand all the ranges and start scanning the ranges for sites that are on 443 HTTPS, and it'll find all the HTTPS sites and parse their certificates and give you back the the owned section of the certificate, right? It'll give you the domain name that is associated to every address that responds to an HTTPS probe. So I've been using that one as well. It's not on the slide, but ASN Recon is actually pretty useful that I've been using lately. Okay, so we've done some ASN enumeration, right? We've gotten the ASNs for our target, right? So here we're back on Twitch, right? We know that Twitch is AS46489. So now we can use a tool called AMAS, or AMAS, excuse me. And AMAS is a tool that does all kinds of different domain intelligence functions, right? It's written by Jeff Foley and the AMAS team. It's an official OWASP project. It's becoming a core bounty hunter tool. I think most of you probably already know about it, but you know, a lot of people really execute anything other than using AMAS Intel, which is one section of the tool. There's actually 4 different sections that the tool does now, and so AMAS will take an ASN number and expand upon all of the top-level seed domains that are inside of that range, and so so you just feed it AMAS Intel ASN and you give it the ASN number, and it'll start pulling down everything that's inside of that IP space that is a top-level domain or a root or seed domain. So here you can see we've run it on Twitch's ASN, and we get back Justin TV, which is the company that Twitch used to be, TTVNW.net, Twitch.tv, TwitchCon.com, which is their conference, and SocialCam, which I don't know what it is. So here we've started to exponentially kind of expand, you know, to some other domains should they, you know, be in scope for a wide scope program. So AMAS Intel is really cool here. So now that we've gone and enumerated some seed domains, in the first step, we want to see if we can find more seed domains. So what else can we do? Well, we can use Reverse Whois. So Reverse Whois is the idea of going to a site that does Whois aggregation of records and basically lets you do searches on different parts of the Whois data, right? And so we know we can give a site like Hawaxi.com, which is a site that I use for my Reverse Whois, and you can basically give them a domain, twitch.tv, and here it gives you actually a whole history of you know, who the company was, you know, how many domains are associated to that company, who the email address is for the hostmaster, etc. And so you can use Hawaxi and get some free credits, but really when you do this search, the data that is interesting is, you know, the kind of things with the arrows by them, which is that previously Twitch.com used to be the company named Justin.tv, which, you know, we kind of knew, or I knew because I've been working with Twitch for a long time. But then now you can click on that little link next to it. You can see that it's changed to Twitch Interactive Inc. and there's 575 other domains that have registered with the company field Twitch Interactive Inc. There's still 20 that are registered with Justin.tv. So you can sift through this Reverse Whois data from these services and try to find more seed domains to expand your search. Now, one thing you have to be wary of, right, is just because something's registered and has a Whois entry does not mean it's live, right? A lot of companies will park a lot of domains, you know, and there's nothing on them. They're just, you know, protecting them either for future use or, you know, protecting them from being spam domains because they look a lot like their main domain. So this is something you want to make sure that you sift through. I would say this is like medium fidelity data when you're going through Reverse Whois, but you can find some gems doing Reverse Whois. There is some automation for this. There's a tool called DOMLink where you can give it basically a domain, and it will go through and find everything else that was both registered by that person as the registrant or the organization name, and it'll recursively do this, so it's a pretty cool tool. It's written by Vincent Yu. All right, so the next method, right, so we've most likely gotten some seed root domains to start with from our scope, or almost always, right? Always. And then now we have gotten some seed domains from our ASN enumeration, and we've gotten some seed domains from possibly reverse DNS. And now we're going to check to see if we can find any new seed domains from ad and analytic relationships. And this is one that I don't think a lot of people have been doing except me for you know, a while. But it's actually really useful. So every time you build a site, usually you embed in Google Analytics or New Relic Analytics or, you know, some type of analytics into your site to track the, you know, the visitation to it and collect metrics. Now there's a site called BuildWith, which I use for multiple things, but in this way, we use BuiltWith to track what other sites are using the same analytics codes as our main domain. So here I've given, I've made a free account with Twitch.tv, and I've made a free account with BuiltWith, and I've searched Twitch.tv. And here you can see under Twitch.tv, there's a tab for what's called Relationship Profile. And already it starts to give you a graph at the bottom of the page about other sites that are similar using the similar tags, right? And you can see that, we identified TwitchCon, there's Man versus TV, there's another domain, twtc.tv. There's some of their regional sub-branded ones like es.twitch.tv. So you can start to see that we get this relationship map, and you can scroll through this and see, okay, these are the other sites that are similar to twitch.tv. And then you can click on any of the individual trackers and drill into that specific tracker, not just amalgamation of all the trackers, and see what other domains that tracker is on, or subdomains that tracker is on. So you could do this through the BuiltWith website. You can also do it through the Chrome extension, which is in the upper right-hand side. They just have this little BuiltWith button that you can click on, and then click Relationship, and it will give you all this information. And I keep that running in my browser almost all the time. I use BuiltWith for multiple stuff, not only for this relationship thing, but also tech stack information as well. So we can start to gather more seed domains with this method. Now, I like to offer some command line different methods for doing this stuff in case you want to automate it and make your own recon frame rate, right? That's what a lot of people are into these days. As soon as I did the last version of this talk, a hunter by the name of Malik came out and built a awesome Python script that basically does this for you. It uses BuiltWith, it parses out the relationship information. So the link is there, and now you can do this on the command line. And you can see here, he does an example of Uber.com, and then you can see that this is everything related to Uber.com. Now, there's a tiny bit of lack of contextual information because you don't know which ad or analytics tracker matched your main domain or whatever. But, like ones that are immediately interesting in this list are like Daftar Uber and driveuber.co.nz, and anything with Uber in it, right, originally could be expansion of scope here for us. So awesome tool. That's great. Or now what you can do, which is more fringe and probably a little bit more manual, although I'm sure there's some tools that do this I haven't really found that are super effective yet, but you can just do some quick Google foo, right? Some Google searching, right? And one of the ways I like to do this is you can Google, things like the copyright text, the terms of service, and the privacy policy text. And you can just put these in quotes with different years in them, right? Make sure to try a couple different years. In fact, the older you can find stuff with this, like 2018, 2017, actually means that the site hasn't probably been updated significantly in a while. So here I've searched, copyright 2019 Twitch Interactive in URL Twitch. And so just try a bunch of different versions of that, or snippets of their terms of service, or snippets of their privacy policy, and see if you can start to find domains that maybe weren't anyplace else. Next is you have Shodan. So a lot of pen testers and bug bounty hunters are used to Shodan. It's actually not one of my super specialties. Like I'm not as strong as I am in Shodan as I am in Google or something like that. With the operators and things like that. But Shodan has a lot of information. Shodan is an infrastructure spider that goes out there and parses and keeps HTTP responses, header information, does technology profiling, and then stores it in this giant database, and you can just query it with all kinds of great operators to find infrastructure or things related to certain organizations and stuff like that, right? So you can search twitch.tv as a free form here, and you get some information. You could also search the organization name on Shodan. You could search a whole bunch of different ways to try to find gems that have been, captured in twitch.tv. Related to the twitch.tv domain. So you can try to use Shodan to do some of this. And I actually use it in a later workflow, which I'll show you, which is subdomain enumeration. I'll use a tool that uses queries to Shodan to go out and try to pull subdomains out of Shodan, which is great. Okay. So now we basically focus on expanding our scope by finding a whole bunch of seed domains. Now what we're going to do with those seed domains is try to find subdomains under those seeds. So subdomain enumeration, I have three main categories of what I do. Linked and JavaScript discovery, subdomain scraping, and subdomain brute force, and then some other auxiliary stuff that maybe fits somewhere in between. So linked and JavaScript discovery, right? We're looking for subdomains now, right? So the first thing that I do is this idea called linked discovery, and I use Burp Suite to do mine most of the time. And the screenshots I'm going to show you are Burp 1.7. I just don't like Burp 2.0's GUI, right? The spider is hard to instigate. The crawler and the scanner are not as controllable as they were in Burp 1.7's UI. They may be better, they may have more vulnerability checks, but for the crawling, I can usually work with 1.7, but I do run 2.0 as well in a separate instance. So what I'm going to show you right now is this process inside of 1.7. So what we're going to do here is we're basically going to visit our site using Burp, right? And so I've visited twitch.tv here, which is the example. And all of a sudden, my site map just blows up, right? It just it's filled with everything that it can see either linked or that has been requested as soon as I landed on Twitch.tv, which is a ton of stuff. So first, we have to kind of pare it down with a rule. So the first thing that we do is we go into Target and we go into Scope, and we click the little button that says Use Advanced Scope Control. And then we're going to add just a regex here, and I'm just going to say Twitch. As the first regex I could add, and you can add as many of these as you want, as a rule, as a target scope rule. Now, when we go back to our target and sitemap, now I can click that little box that says Show Only In-Scope Items, and that will significantly bring down what you're viewing in the site tree. Okay, so after that's done, we get everything that has twitch.tv in somewhere in the URL, right? Which is great. This is a lot to work with, right? Already, this is a lot of scope. Well, we want to try to expand even more on this. So what you do is you select all of these and you run the spider on them. And then if you don't deselect them, it actually gives you an idea of how much more you found. So once the spider is finished, you can see that we found a whole bunch of new stuff in white than we had originally, right? A ton of subdomains that are linked or are actually requested when you spider these sites, so when you try to execute them, right? And then your next phase after this would be to select everything again and spider it again, and just you do this over and over again until you weren't getting any more results, and that's everything that's linked with any domain that has twitch.tv or Twitch in the URL, which gives you a ton of scope to work with. You can see there's many sites in your site tree now that you have to investigate. You just go to each one and you start hacking. I've also gotten some that are not the seed. I've gotten some new seed domains, right? This is a hybrid technique. You'll get subdomains and seed domains. So I got Twitch app and x-twitch.tv and Twitch service or Twitch svc.net. So these are new seed domains that we can go back and add to our seed domain list, and now we can do subdomain enumeration on them as well. So how do you get this list once you have the site tree, all spidered recursively? Well, there's no great way to do it. In fact, I'm looking for someone to write, some type of tool to do this, or I might just write it myself eventually if I get frustrated enough. So the way to do it is that you have to have Burp Pro, and you select everything in your site tree, and you go right-click and choose Engagement Tools and Analyze Target. And that generates this HTML report. This HTML report, when you generate the HTML report, you open it up and then you just copy that list under target analysis, and that's a unique list of all of your in-scope stuff right there. Because you could just copy all of the URLs, but that would be a lot of data. You're talking about, since your spider has spidered all this stuff, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of URLs that then you're gonna have to paste 100,000 URLs in a text file, and then you're gonna have to sort, grep, unique, cut, awk, sed, whatever you're going to do to bring that down to unique URLs. So this way is actually way faster for me most of the time. All right, so link discovery, it used to be something I only did in Burp Suite because it just had an effective spider, and I didn't really have a lot of effective spiders out there on the command line to work with. But that has changed in the past year and a half, right? There are two projects. One by an awesome person and hunter called HackLuke, which is called HackCrawler, which will basically spider a site, and another one called GoSpider, which will spider a site. So you can see they both give you back endpoints as well as subdomains, as well as they will mark JavaScript files. They will also parse your robots.txt. to get those links. So they've got a lot of cool little features in them, and you could probably institute and script up yourself the link discovery process using these spiders. I still do it most of the time inside of Burp, but someday I might actually go with one of these tools and write my own process for this. Okay, so the next thing is you can get some subdomains. You can get some subdomains from the JavaScript files that you find on these pages, right? Using Burp, you can parse out all the JS files that exist, and you can save them, and then you can run tools on them. But this tool in specific has like an extra function with it that I really like. It's called Subdomainizer, and what it does is it'll take a JavaScript file, a single JavaScript file. And not only will it parse it for subdomains, it'll also parse it for cloud services that they're using, like SaaS services. And then it'll also parse it for keys. It uses the Shannon entropy formula to try to find things that look like keys in JavaScript source code. So it's also really nice. It's still in development and probably needs a little bit more work, but definitely it pulls back some interesting results in large JavaScript files, which is awesome. And then if you run this over everything, you can start to find some keys and stuff like that. If you're just looking at scraping subdomains from JavaScript files and you don't want that extra little bit of cloud services and key analysis, you can use a tool called Subscraper by Cillian Collins, which is awesome. So, yeah. Okay, so we're still finding subdomains, but we're going to use a different method now, which is subdomain scraping, which is what a lot of you are probably used to when you use tools like Amass or Subfinder or things like that. So what subdomain scraping is basically going out to a whole bunch of different sources on the internet and scraping their databases and pulling back any information they have on your target, right? There's a whole bunch of tools that do this. And so the tools that exist nowadays are probably only as good as their sources, right? And I've listed some of the sources out there on the internet. Infrastructure sources are things like Census, Robtex, the Wayback Machine, DNS Dumpster, Netcraft, etc. You obviously know all the search engine sources. There's a whole bunch of certificate projects that have domain information in them, and then security projects which have domain information in them. So all of these sites, if you were to go to them individually, there's usually a search field to look for something related to a domain, malware, or certificate data, or infrastructure data, or just searching that domain, right? And so these tools have all been specially built to parse these and try to find any references to, if we were using an example before, Twitch.tv, right? And these are just some of the sources. There are many sources that these tools are scraping nowadays. So the next tools we're going to talk about do exactly this. They scrape these sources. Before we get into the tools, I'm going to talk to you a little about how you would do this manually, right? So here's Google, and this is just the way that you would do it for Google, right? If you wanted to scrape Google for all of its subdomains it knows about Twitch.tv, it's pretty simple. You would start with site:twitch.tv, and then you would say, Google, I don't want to see anything that says www.twitch.tv, right? And so you say -www.twitch.tv, and you'd search that, and that would give you everything that isn't www.twitch.tv. So you'll start to see other subdomains like link.twitch.com, and you're like, cool. In the results that you gave me now, I don't want to see watch.twitch.tv because I already know about that, or dev.twitch.tv, and you just keep on iteratively minusing these out and doing searches until there's nothing left, and now you've enumerated every subdomain that Google possibly knows about Twitch.tv. So, this would be the manual way that you do this subdomain scraping on a search engine. There are tools, however, to do this for you. And so when you're doing subdomain scraping, Amass is one of the kings of doing this, along with the tool we're going to talk about next. So we've already said Amass is written by Jeff Foley and the Amass team. It's an OWASP project. It's an awesome script, and the source that does it, which is not correct in the screenshot, amass-d twitch.tv would not work anymore. It has to be amass-enum-d twitch.tv. But it will go out to all these sources, and it will bring you back all the subdomain data, which is great because you can just point it and go and get all your subdomains. Amass also does some awesome things with basically giving you a table at the end of an enum scan, which is really cool. And I think this table is super underplayed when it comes to bounty hunting, right? What this does is it gives you a really good feel of it tells you where these subdomains were found, what IP range, and what ASN they belong to, which is really useful for you as a hunter. I don't see a lot of hunters using this table to its full potential, right? So if we ran it here on twitch.tv, this table tells us that a large portion of the majority is in Amazon, which makes sense because they were acquired by Amazon, right? But also, they still have their own ASN, Justin TV, here at 46489, which we knew earlier. And they're also in, some third parties. They're using SendGrid for mail. They use Fastly. So this gives us some more information about how their infrastructure is kind of done, right? Because, we're pulling this all from third-party sources on the internet, and, just because a domain, a CNAME has been registered or a subdomain has been instantiated, it doesn't mean it's all going to be in the same network. So this is good information for us to understand. In fact, I've done this before with enum, and the table will give me back an ASN that I failed to gather in the earlier part of the methodology. So I'll go back and I'll start the process over with that ASN that I now know is associated to my target. So this table is super sweet. All right, the next tool is called SubFinder, and this is one that's neck and neck with Amass all the time. They're always releasing new sources, new features. They're both great, honestly. In fact, SubFinder just incorporated something I'm going to talk about in a couple slides about parsing subdomains from GitHub. But SubFinder was written by Iceman and Michael Skelton, also known as Kadingo, a good friend of mine. And it is an epic tool. Recently, it's been taken over by the Project Discovery IO team, which is a team that's more than just Iceman, but a whole bunch of people who are building this massive recon framework and releasing some really stellar individual tools for bounty hunting. So SubFinder is the same idea, right? You give it a domain, and it will go out to all these sources and pull back subdomain data for you, which is awesome. And if you're wondering, I use both of these. In my automation, I use Amass and SubFinder in parallel. Okay, so this is one that I just talked about, right? So right now, SubFinder just implemented GitHub scraping into their tool. But the original idea came from Gwendolyn Quick, and basically what this does is it uses GitHub as a source, and none of these other tools have done that for a long time. So you give it your GitHub API key, and then you give it your domain, and it will go out and parse all of this source code for subdomains for Twitch.tv, which is quite frankly awesome. I found some stuff through the GitHub tools that I had not found in any other tools, and made great bounties from these. So this is why I put the little fire icon, in the bottom right-hand corner. This is a really effective method. It's one of my favorite methods right now. So Gwendol wrote a whole set of GitHub tools, not only to do subdomain enumeration, but also source code searching on GitHub from the command line. Just like, I think there was 5 or 6 different tools that did different things on GitHub. I mostly use this one, but the whole suite is awesome. I've supported his tools on GitHub monetarily as a donator, so I can't speak enough about how great they are. And so what you'll need is to register a couple of GitHub accounts, create API keys, and then also the GitHub API, when you're using this tool, is kind of finicky, right? It's rate limited. Also, like, the searches aren't consistent. If you do the same search twice in a row, it won't give you the same results. So what I do is I actually, inside of my automation, run this a whole bunch of times, 5 iterations, and then sleep in between them, and then a big long sleep, and then one last run. And I cat all that into a file, and then sort and unique it at the end. And then that usually seems to give me a lot of runway and consistency. Now, this method has been integrated into Project Discovery's tool, which is awesome, and you can do pretty much the same things in there. I haven't tested them side by side to see which one is more stable or effective or anything like that. One thing you can say here is that you can add to both of these tools multiple API keys. So if one gets blacklisted, then you have a backup, or concurrent, you can run 2 at the same time. So you can add as many API keys as you want to these tools. I usually run with like 5 or something like that. So. Okay, the other one I talked about earlier is Shodan, right? And so there's a tool called ShowSubGo, which is a Go tool written to parse Shodan for anything related to your domain. So here I've passed Twitch.tv into this tool, and it has gone down to Shodan and used all of the effective search operators. It's written by Incogbyte, and basically you provide it your API key for Shodan, which is pretty cheap nowadays, and it will give you back all of the subdomain enumeration for Shodan. So this is great. As well, I add this to my stuff. This can also be done inside of Amass. The only reason I don't use Amass for this particular source is that I've found inconsistencies sometimes with the parsing of Shodan, and I've gotten more results from this script just running it side by side. So I don't know exactly what's going on there, but yeah, I use this independently inside of my workflow. All right, so the next method for finding subdomains is this idea of scraping all the cloud ranges, right? So we talked about earlier that the cloud ranges themselves aren't going to be in those ASNs you pulled down in a wide scope bounty. And so basically what we want to do is we want to go out to the whole range of AWS and GCP and Azure, and that's huge, right? And we want to go out and visit all of their HTTPS sites, anything that's SSL. And then we want to take those SSL certs and we want to parse out the subdomains from them that are in there. And you can do this yourself. You could do this with something like MassScan, which would still be pretty fast. But also there's a project by Sam Erb at DEF CON a couple years ago where he created a service that does this, bufferover.run. And you can query, and I think he's doing this kind of mass scanning every 2 weeks. So there's a couple links here. One is Dahi Park's excellent article on how you can do it yourself. So you could set it up yourself to do the scanning, or you could use a service, bufferover.run, and watch Sam's talk and how he built his. This is also built into, I believe, Amass, and again, same thing, I tend to use the standalone tool over Amass's source for this just because of some small inconsistencies. So you're free to check out both Amass and basically this buffer overrun site, but this is a very powerful method. Basically, you're going to start to enumerate a lot of stuff that is in the cloud, and if you do this iteratively, over you do it once a week, you'll find new data that people have, or new infrastructure that people have just spun up in the cloud, and you'll find new subdomains and things like that. So a really powerful method here is scanning the cloud ranges. Okay, so we've gotten our seed domains, and we've enumerated subdomains for those seed domains using scraping and some JavaScript analysis. Now the last place we're going to get subdomain information is through brute force. So brute force has been around for a long time. It was the first subdomain enumeration method that a lot of pen testers use. You remember we used things like Fierce and a whole bunch of other older DNS brute forcing tools, and so those tools were great. We've evolved a little bit from them, but some not really. Some are still great, but right now, the idea of brute forcing the subdomain name, just giving it a random word and seeing if it resolves, you can handle this inside of things like mass DNS. And so from the history, basically Fierce was the first one that we had, or one of the first serious ones that I remember everyone using a lot. The iteration in the last 5 years has been that mass DNS is the newest tool, and what it does is it uses multiple DNS resolvers simultaneously. So you can imagine all these DNS resolutions could take a lot of time, and Fierce, with a giant word list of brute forcing stuff, could take a long time to finish, or some of these older tools. Well, mass DNS basically cuts that work up along multiple DNS resolvers, and you can do this in 1/10, maybe even 1/20th the time that you used to be able to do it before. So Amass, has now built this idea of multiple resolvers into its tool, and it's had it for quite a while actually. I was using mass DNS for the longest time, and they pioneered the idea, but I now use Amass for this, and Amass already uses 8 resolvers by default, and you can go out and parse more resolvers for yourself that you trust, DNS resolvers, and add them to its list, and it'll dramatically increase the brute forcing speed of Amass. So Amass enum-brute-d your domain, and then you can even add the -src flag, but this will basically brute force for you, and it's great. You can also specify, like I said, your number of resolvers, or add a resolver list by text file, and so that's the way I do brute forcing most of the time, is through Amass. There's some other tools that are also supposed to be just as fast with AIS DNS brute, but I'm pretty sure Amass is kind of on the leading edge of brute forcing now, I think. The other one that you can use is Shuffle DNS by the Project Discovery team. Also does the same kind of stuff. So it's pretty good, brute forcing. Awesome tool, multiple resolvers. It relies on mass DNS. So if you want to separate the tool workflow, I know a lot of people have like resource constraints. Like the big problem with the mass is it does a lot of things right now, and it takes up a lot of resources, and some people don't only like to use it for certain things. So if you want to separate the workload between tools, or you think that one's more stable or runs faster or whatever, I don't have any benchmarks for you right now. I could in the future, but Shuffle DNS could be your tool because it wraps around mass DNS. So. Okay, so we've brute forced, we identified, some brute force tools that you can use that are infinitely faster because of their multi-DNS resolver kind of architecture. Now, we want to talk about, they're only as good as the lists you provide them, right? And that's true, right? So you have to give them a word list. So there are two trains of thought here on word lists. One is a tailored word list that you build yourself, and Tom Nom Nom at NahamCon, which was the conference that Ben did a month or two back, talked about building your own word lists, which is awesome because then you could build a word list that focuses on your target and stuff that they might be running. And I suggest you watch that talk on that kind of method. And then you have massive word lists, which tend to be what I use, but both have advantages. So I use an all.txt. I've released this before. It's my DNS file that basically I took all of the DNS keywords that all of these old tools had, and even newer research for subdomains had, and I've basically put them all into one file and sort of unique them. So I use all.txt in my automation when I'm brute forcing for subdomains. There's also some newer research. So my all.txt includes this newer research, the first version of it, and this is called the CommonSpeak project by the AssetNote team, who run AssetNote, the attack surface mapping tool, and which is really awesome. And they did an open source project to release. They used BigQuery to go out and query different sites around the internet, like Reddit and a whole bunch of other places, Stacktrace and things like that, of mentions of domains to build like a newer school data set that had subdomains. And I think parameters too. I'm not exactly, I can't remember it, but I know subdomains. And so they did the first version of this, and I took the first version of that and I put it into my all.txt file, which is already up there. But version 2 has come out in the last year and a half, and it has a new set of targets that they've parsed and new sets of data. And I would suggest looking at it to see, if you want to add those to your word list as well. So now we brute forced, based off of words, but now there's this idea of what I call alteration scanning, and this was pioneered by Nafi and Shubs, who are two really prominent awesome bug bounty hunters, awesome humans as well. And they wrote this tool called AltDNS, and what this would do would be it would notice a subdomain when doing scanning, right? Something like dev.company.com, and then it would add permutations to it. Try dev1, try dev2, try dev-1, try dev-2, try dev.1.company.com. So it will add all these permutations and try to resolve them as well. So it's not wordless scanning, it's permutation-based scanning, kind of similar to what you do with passwords. Now, AltDNS was the first tool to do this. Since AltDNS, Amass has also integrated permutation scanning into its engine. I tend to use Amass with this function when I'm doing all my other Amass scanning too. So alteration scanning, just some key benefits, right? So usually when you have a WAF, right, if you look for the production or here I was on dub. I found I thought I had found SQL injection, but I was getting blocked by the WAF, and then they didn't apply the WAF to dub2, so I was able to get SQL injection. Other things are basically adding permutations to find the origin of a site for like Akamai or some other CDN like technology. Finding the origin will completely bypass a lot of filtering and go to the source. So I've used tools to find origins before using permutation scanning or alteration scanning for basically WAF bypass. Okay, so we're about to wrap it up here. Okay, so now we talk a little bit about, once we have all this stuff, do we want to do some port level analysis on all of these subdomains we've had? Yeah, we do. So basically, old school hacking, nomenclature would have you use things like nmap, right? And even even with,
Perdón, pero
well, there's
ustedes
actually
ya
a
están
raging
siguiendo
debate going on right now
aquí.
about this, but even with the best flags, like in
Estaban
something like
robando en la,
min
¿Ah?
rate,
estaban robando en la
I
farmacia.
still believe
Ujú.
that they're,
Yo iba a entrar
mass
y la
scan in
puerta estaba
this
bloqueada.
instance, which I put in this
Pero
slide, is
después es
probably a more
importante o no.
superior
No,
way to
dime,
do
dime.
port scanning.
Y bueno,
The
me quedé
reason
ahí
why is
esperando,
because
pensé que
it has a
adentro
rewritten
había
TCP/IP
mucha gente,
stack
por eso lo
that's
habían
for
bloqueado.
port scanning.
Después el
It's
tipo va a salir
multi-threaded, it's
y el tipo
written in
empieza,
C.
abre, abre. Y el
You can say
guardia
a lot
le
of these things
dice,
about
deje
Nmap.
todos los productos primero
Side
que
by
me
side, I'm
voy.
pretty sure that
Y
mass
yo la
scan,
puerta así. Yo me fui yendo un
beats
poquito para atrás
Nmap most of the
y el
time for
tipo
fast,
saca dos cosas del
only
bolsillo.
port
Ábreme,
analysis
ábreme, Paco, conche tu
level
madre, me
scans.
lo
So
empaco, era un cuarto.
I use
Y el tipo
mass
le
scan
dice,
for
no,
my port
todavía
scanning.
faltan cosas.
You can scan a whole range
No, te las voy a devolver.
of
Entonces el tipo le dice,
ports.
no, no
You can give it
salgo.
an input list and give
Le
it a
sacó
max
lo
rate or a
otro,
min
lo
rate.
tiró
It takes the same
y
syntax as
luego le hizo
Nmap, which
así
is
al
useful.
estante que había detrás
And
de
then
él.
if
Y
you
ahí
want
el
to get
guardia la
really
abrió y
into mass
salió.
scan and all of its
Y
syntax,
yo,
Daniel Miessler, who's a buddy
el
of
tipo
mine, has
volvió
an
a
excellent
cerrar.
article on his website.
Y
He
el
breaks
tipo se
down
fue
tools
derechito para la ahumada,
to
más
the nth
así.
degree, and so
Yo
you
fui a
can
la
go there
Cruz
and see all
Verde.
the syntax for mass
Ujú.
scan. But when I
Entonces
do
el
port
guardia
analysis, I
después
feed
le
all
hace
of my
señas al
domains
otro
into a
y el
resolver to
otro
get their
lo
IP
saca también
address
de ahí.
because it only takes
Pues
mass
yo
scan only
digo,
takes IP
igual,
addresses,
qué susto,
and
porque
then
imagínate donde el
I
tipo
send those
estuviera
IP
armado.
addresses through mass scan.
No,
Now, I
realmente
just
como
talked
yo
about
tengo
one limitation
puesto,
is that it only
Sí,
scans IP addresses. Well, you can use
imagínate.
a
como que
tool called
tengo
DNMass, which is a
los derechos
wraparound
como que
mass
puedo
scan
autenticar.
by Rostating, and basically it will, you can give it again, you can give it domains, right? So this is super
Últimamente.
useful,
Ahora
and
se me
then it
pasó,
also
pero
gives you a table
aparte
of
también
a
sencillo.
log of everything that was open.
¿Cómo se
Yeah,
te
so
olvidó?
if you didn't want to write your own parser to resolve the domain, you can use something like DNMass scan, and it will
Amor, ¿qué
do
me
that
ama?
for you.
Mucho. ¿Quieres alguna
Okay,
cosita?
so we've got
Sí, mi
we've
amor.
got root
Igual
domains,
estaba
we've got
ahí, yo dije,
subdomains for those root
el tipo va a sacar
domains.
un arma.
We've got permutations. Basically, we started to do some port scanning on all those subdomains, which is great. One auxiliary thing we want to do here is start doing some port scanning, and this is more in-depth port scanning. So basically, the whole workflow is mass scan or DN mass scan, right? And then feed that output to Nmap to do a full service scan to get the full service data, and then you could feed that to a tool called BruteSpray, which does credential brute forcing using Medusa. And so you can use basically BruteSpray's built-in credential list and just see if any of these services that you might find doing the port scan, like FTP, SMTP, SSH, MySQL, all of these, if they have default passwords enabled, and these are quick and easy wins. So this is written by X90 Skysnick, which is an awesome name, and BruteSpray is pretty cool. I've also heard that you could probably do this with Ncrack. I haven't had a ton of experience with Ncrack for a long time, so I'm going to look into it for the next version of the talk and see how that would work. All right, so along in this whole recon idea is the idea of searching GitHub for usually passwords and keys or internal information on a company. I do this with a quick bash script. So as my subdomain enumeration is running, which is the longest part of my lifecycle of my automation, I just generate these links that have the search query that I want to search for, and my gist for all of the things I'm looking for is right there. It's a gist on my GitHub. So, or gist, I don't know exactly how you say that. So if your shell supports terminal hyperlinks, you can click on that and it'll take you to GitHub as long as you're logged in. It'll do a search for twitch.tv and password, and then you start looking through the code and the results. This can be automated to a sense using GitHub Search that Gwendol wrote in his tool suite, and also just to get a great feel of what you're looking for when you're doing secret searching using GitHub Dorking. Check out the gentleman's Bugcrud University module on GitHub Recon and Sensitive Data Explorer. It is absolutely great. Probably the best primer on the thing on that topic so far. So I do this while my tools are running, basically. At this point, we have a whole bunch of domains and subdomains. And if I have a large list, it can be useful to screenshot them, right? And you can feed all of your domains to several tools. Aquatone, HTTP Screenshot, Eyewitness, they all have pros and cons. But really what you're trying to do here is get a screenshot, either an HTML report that has screenshots or a folder full of screenshots, and just kind of eyeball them and be like, oh yeah, that site looks super old, or that's a CMS I know is vulnerable to something, good, or anything that's not the main page, basically. So you can use screenshots to prioritize your work in bug bounty hunting. There's also a new one called Witness Me, which just came out. I just added it to this version, and it's supposed to be really good because you can perform this from an API. You can instigate from an API. There's just a whole bunch of cool bells and whistles to Witness Me. I recommend you go check it out. It looks pretty cool. So there's a bunch of ways that you can do this screenshotting method. That doesn't really matter. Just if you want to prioritize, you can use it. During this recon step, there are some really automated things that you can do that aren't like in-depth application analysis. One of them is searching for subdomain takeovers. The basic primer on this, this method was kind of invented by Franz Rosen, or at least most of the modern ones were created by Franz Rosen. But the most up-to-date primer on services that you may land on for subdomain takeover are in Ed Overflow's repo, Ed Overflow is awesome, in a repo called Can I Take Over XYZ? And so it has explanations of all these services. When you go to a subdomain of something and it redirects you to one of these services and they don't no longer use that service, but the CNAME is still valid, it tells you, it says, yeah, if Amazon, if a domain name for s3.amazon.com is returning the string no such bucket, then you can create a bucket with this name. But you need to register. And so it does this with each service and tells you, if things are takeoverable, which is a great resource. To do this, on the command line, you probably would have used Subover most of the time. It was a standalone tool written by Iceman, but since Iceman has gone to the Project Discovery project, that team, they've built it into Nuclei Scanner. Now I'm going to do a little plug for Nuclei Scanner because I think it's one of the future of web app scanning, right? But just for this specific task, subdomain takeovers, their subdomain takeover library is the most complete that I've seen. It has the most takeover checks that I've seen so far in an automated tool. So I would use Subover for this automation. Nuclei, which is the larger framework in which the subdomain checks are in, the new one, is absolutely amazing. It is one of the coolest pieces of scanning tech to come out for a while. That team is on fire. Really excited to see what they come out with next. All right, so let's talk about automation. Okay, so after you do all this, right? Like if you were doing all this manually, and sometimes I end up doing, like 20% of it manually and automating the rest of the 80%. If you're going to make an automation script, eventually you'll need to glue some tools together. And so the tool that I really like for this that adds extensibility to other tools is a tool called Interlace by Michael Skelton or Codingo. And what it does is it allows you to thread tools that don't include threading inherently. It allows you to add target notation like Nmap has using a range or a glob on IP addresses to a tool that doesn't already have that. It's just got these, it's got all of these different helpers to make, maybe a bash script or, a Python script that hasn't thought or hasn't built these things into it yet or hasn't thought through these things. It basically extends them and makes them able to do these things. So Hack Luke wrote an awesome article on some use cases like threading Nikto, right? Which could be a scanner that you use. A lot of people like Nikto. You can read his guide there. So Interlace is a sweet, sweet tool that allows you to glue together other parts of your recon framework when you get into making one. Tom Nom Nom, his whole repo is awesome. Enough can't be said about this guy. He's a monster when it comes to Bash. I thought I loved Bash. Tom Nom Nom just blows me out of the water. So most the tools that I use most with Tom Nom Nom are HTTP Probe. It's a middle part of glue between when I find all those subdomains and when I want to see if services are live. HTTP Probe will take those subdomains and just scan for 80 and 443 and give me back results. So HTTP Probe sits in the middle of most people's automation right now. Wayback URLs will parse the Wayback Machine for everything known about a domain, and then Meg is like a directory brute forcer, but for many hosts. Instead of pounding on one host with a word list until it falls over with your large word list that you're doing for directory brute forcing or content discovery, whatever you want to call it, Meg will go to a list of hosts with very few requests and see if they're there. And so I highly recommend using Meg, and I'll just give you some easy wins, right? Like .env files, .environment files. So megging those across your whole domain list can really quickly get you some money. The other day I found a .git, a .git ignore path, right? I fed it to Meg, ran it over my whole list for a project, got 3 hits. One of them was valid. And yeah, so, give it some really surefire, directories, and Meg will go over your whole list. And so Meg is awesome. Okay, last part of the talk, running a little bit over, my bad, but we're going to talk here about frameworks. So it could be that all of this recon is not your thing. It's definitely my thing. I love it. I'm not apologetic about that. I think recon's really cool. Nothing makes me more happy than finding a target I don't think anyone has landed on before. I can just tell that it's so obscure that I'm probably the only one who's found this. That almost makes me as happy as hacking the site itself. But that's just me, right? It could be that recon is not really your thing, right? So several hunters have open sourced their automation into recon frameworks. Now, I am going to classify these frameworks in some different tiers, and this is very, very rough, right? It's all subjective. I'm not Gartner here. I know people got offended after I released these framework tiers, but I'm just going to go with the information I have, and hopefully that'll inform some people. Okay, so we have 4 tiers. It's just like a gaming tier list, right? If you've ever seen somebody do like a review of all of the builds for Diablo 3 or something like that, they classify them into 4 tiers. C tier is pretty average, still good. B tier is getting better. A tier is really good. S tier is probably the best, right? So I put some functions that each thing would have. In a C tier, these frameworks are mostly building around other scripts and gluing them together in Python or Bash. They're step-based workflows. They only have a few techniques, maybe, and little extensibility in their output. B tier automation is automation. Maybe they're writing a few of their own modules. Maybe they have a GUI or some advanced workflow that makes the speed of the whole process lower. They have more techniques that they're using, but they still run point in time, and they probably still track everything in flat files. If they track anything at all, they could just be single shot tools. B tier is starting to write some of their own modules of whatever they're doing, finding subdomains or whatever. They have GUIs. Some of them have GUIs. They run iteratively, like they run at points in times, like a cron job or something like that. And they manage all of this. A tier, one of the distinctive qualities is that they manage it through a database. So S tier is the highest level. They're writing probably all of their own modules. They have a GUI. They run iteratively. They manage it all through a DB. They scale across multiple boxes. They send alerts to the user when new things are being found. They use novel techniques, and they iterate quickly, and they institute either some powerful algorithms or maybe some ML or AI inside of their tools. Probably not AI, mostly ML and fancy algorithms. So these are the tiers. We're going to talk about some of them right now. This is just a warning. My scale, like I said, is mostly subjective. It can be missing factors. It is also based off my experience and gut feel. It is not something people should take to heart. I'm just giving it my opinion. Okay, so C tier. So these are the ones that are, basically wrapping around other tools. Just for disclaimer, my tool that I use every hunt is a C tier tool. Okay, so these still work great. C and up, are great tools, and they can do exactly what you want and nothing less, and that could be great. Or nothing more, and that could be great. So here we have Bounty Recon, Recon tools, but the one that's shown up on the right here is Ultimate Recon, and what I like about Ultimate Recon is it does the process that we just talked about, a lot of the tools we've just talked about to find domains and subdomains, and it includes running nucleus checks, nucleus scans on everything that it finds. So that's the reason I showed the screenshot of Ultimate Recon. All right, B tier. So Lazy Recon maps out the whole start of a recon workflow. It uses AMAS and Subfinder. It will combine those. It will then run some vulnerability checks like Subjack for takeovers, Core Scanner for Core's vulnerabilities. It'll do screenshots and dump those in a folder or report for you. It will do brute forcing. Then it'll scan all of those with Nmap, right? So basically, a lot of what we just talked about, it'll do, on the command line, which is great. In the A tier, you have three, Recon Pipeline, RockOn, and Find Domain. And Find Domain is one that I hadn't had a lot of experience with, and they were actually really sad about getting into A tier and not S tier when I did my original talk. So they contacted me and they said, "Hey, check out the tool, the pro version. It's a paid tool, but it's pretty sick." And so Find Domain, it still sits in the A tier, but it's so close to S tier, and the only thing that holds it back from S tier is a GUI, basically, because it has all the other functions. It has port scans. It uses all these tools to find subdomains. It'll alert the user over multiple levels, and it'll even email you when you find things, new applications that come, or new DNS entries that come up. So the only thing it doesn't have is some of these fancier GUIs or any vulnerability checks yet. So it's still like right on the verge of A to S tier. Okay, so here's S tier. Now, first thing to note, some of these are paid tools, and you'll probably never use them, unfortunately, but I'm not talking about them anyway. Intrigue.io is a service that Jay Cran runs. I used to work with Jay Cran at Bugcrowd. He's an awesome dude, and he writes this tool called Intrigue. The cool thing about Intrigue is he has a SaaS version of it that he's selling as a product, and it's pretty amazing. But he also open sources almost all of the code for Intrigue on GitHub. So you could take it and run it yourself. You just have to pay for the hosting costs, and I think that some parts are not, like the GUI is not exactly there, but the core engine is all there. It's all basically open source. Intrigue is amazing. I love where he's going with Intrigue, and John iterates super fast as well. Jay Cran iterates super fast when it comes to methods of checking. In fact, after I released the first version of this talk, he was already going over it for methods, so it's amazing. Asset Note was built by a whole bunch of former bug hunters, Shubs being one of them, and they've gone and made it enterprise level service. But this should be like kind of one of the gold standards when it comes to both functionality and GUIs for a recon framework, right? It's a paid service, and probably no bug hunter's ever going to use it because it's expensive for a single bug hunter, but not expensive for a business that might purchase this for an attack surface management project. But it has a lot of functions, a lot of features, and they have started to build their own vulnerability checks that nobody else is checking for. Iteratively, it gives you data, it tells you changes. It's probably the gold standard that a lot of these open source frameworks are gonna work towards, I would say. All right, then you have Spiderfoot. Now, Spiderfoot has an amazing GUI and amazing analysis engine, but is not tailored towards bug hunters yet. And so I know that the author of Spiderfoot is trying to tailor Spiderfoot more towards bug hunting. Spiderfoot is somewhat of a paid tool, but it's at a lower price range. So I've used it a little bit for other things, and he started to integrate bug bounty kind of ideas inside of there, so it's pretty good. The one that's unreleased that a lot of people are talking about is Project Discovery's framework, and this is, they don't have a name for it yet. I can't remember if they've given a name to it, but you can see that it looks super slick, right? It's got projects, it's got scans for each of these things. It'll give you port level information. This is just one screenshot. It'll find all your subdomains for you. It'll IM you whenever or DM you whenever you find a new one. So Project Discovery is working on one of these. It's unreleased, but they've released a lot of the tools that are going into the engine already, right? Nuclei we've talked about. There's a whole bunch of other tools that they're building. Okay, so these ones were new to me. So on top of Nuclei, Jails is also a scanner that's being written that is by Jesse JJJ, which is awesome. So I highly suggest you look into Jails and Nuclei as scanners. Osmedius, I think that's how you say it. Osmedius is one that you can stand up by yourself. It's free. And you can see that we're starting to get a lot of really homegrown, great development on these recon frameworks, right? And you can build a workspace. It'll institute all your subdomain scanning. Osmedius includes technology profiling and port scanning as well, screenshots. So it's pretty slick. HunterSuite.io, I think it's a paid product, but I think it's a paid product in the price range of bug hunters, right? Also starting to do the same thing, technology services, you can scan it, screenshots, etc., all in a nice GUI. You can start to do wordless brute forcing off of it. It's great. These two are also pretty new. So bounty.offensiveai.com also paid, but in the realm of feasibility for bounty hunters. Same thing. You can have projects, screenshots, port scans, domain enumeration, technology mapping. It's kind of blocked off there, but you can get like an attack map for each individual asset and look for, I think, CVE parsings getting worked into there. Re-Engine was one I used this week by Yogesh Shoha. I'm sorry, I'm butchering that. But he's a follower on Twitter, and he basically took my methodology and put it into a framework that he made called Rengen or Re-Engine, Recon Engine. And, dashboard, projects, subdomain scans, endpoint parser. Yeah, it's pretty sick. It's missing a couple features. I tried it out this weekend, but it's pretty good. Pretty good, and it's free. And then Scout, right? So PDP is a long-time hacker, and he's been releasing web hacking tools as part of the secapps.com team. They make their own alternative to Burp, which runs in the browser. They basically take every need that a hacker or bug hunter could need, and they make a tool out of it really quickly. They just released Scout, which is a subscription-based recon service. And here you can see awesome stuff, right? So you can schedule a project or a domain. It will, do subdomain enumeration. It'll do certificate matching. It will look for certain vulnerabilities that are easy to institute inside of Scout. It'll give you screenshots for everything. Scout looks pretty slick. Yeah, S tier stuff is getting there. Not any one of them has done everything yet, right? So it's still kind of an open playing field. There's a lot of methods that still exist to implement into these things. I guess the hazard of building an open source framework like this is eventually, once it gets really, really good and a lot of people use it, you probably put a significant amount of development time into it, and you want to get paid for your work, which makes total sense to me. And as a bug hunter, I will pay for a good recon framework as long as it does everything I need. So yeah, so these are all really easy to use if you really don't like recon. Just another honorable mention is this nuclei tool that I talked about, right? This is the end of the presentation, but the project discovery team has really gone pretty far with what they're doing with the nuclei tool. So it does a whole bunch of vulnerability scans, and I saw a tweet earlier this week. I can't remember who it was by, maybe Corsec or one of those guys on Twitter. But nuclei is going to be like the Metasploit of web hacking. We haven't really had something like this where you can make your own checks. The checks are extensible and easy to write. The framework is distributed. They're releasing checks all the time. They're releasing tool functions all the time. Nuclei is going to be, really cool for a long time. So, all right, we're pretty far into the hour. I'm sorry I took more than my time. Hopefully that's okay. But I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up in the chat or on Twitter @jhaddix. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.
All right, what an awesome talk by Jason Haddix. Really cool to see somebody go in and put in the effort to not only show how to properly do reconnaissance when it comes down to bug bounties, but also going as far as highlighting other tools that have been written in the community, by the community, to perform these tedious tasks of recon. I'm a big fan of recon myself, as you guys may already know, but it's very cool to see someone going into this level of details and explaining how to perform recon properly. All right, we have a quick break. We're going to take a 2-minute break. Up next, we are going to get online with Luke Tucker, your Director of Community, also my boss. We'll talk about some CTF. We're going to talk about potential winners. We still don't know who's going to win. We have 30 more minutes. Then we're going to come back and wrap up with the last talk of the day. So hang tight. We'll be back in a few minutes with our short break, and we'll be right back.
Mi amor, oye, tan bobito, pero
No podía.
mamá, pichollita, mamá le gusta que ya toque, mamá. Me faltan.
Tranquilo, amor. Amor,
¿Mm?
pensaba calentar unas alitas. ¿Quieres picar unas alitas?
Bueno, pero en un ratico más.
Ya.
Ahí termino.